the greatest common factor. And rather than writing that all out because it's three relatively good-sized words, the book and most people will abbreviate that to be the GCF, greatest common factor. And in your world of text messaging, that should be relatively easy because LOL and all that other stuff. The greatest common factor. And in order to understand greatest common factor, we first must remember what factors are. And let's look at that. If I asked you, what are the factors of, let's just do 6 and 8. What are the factors of 6 and 8? What are the factors of 6? In other words, what numbers can you divide 6 by? What multiplied by itself gives you 6? We've talked about this before. Anybody out there in the real world of grace? Factors of 6 would be what? 1 times 6 and 2 times 3, correct? Yeah, bingo. Go there. Factors of 8, Lance Burton, are what? 1 times 8 and what else? 2 times 4. So there are our factors. Going the next step, what would be the common factors? Or what factors do both 6 and 8 have? Which ones do they share? And you would tell me, well, it looks like they both have 1s and they both have 2s, correct? So the common factors would be 1 and 2. And then making the big, giant final leap here, what is the greatest common factor they have? That would be the biggest one that they share, which would happen to be the number 2. 2 is the greatest common factor. Why do you suppose they wouldn't ask you for the least common factor? You have your A game to answer this one. Why not the least common factor? Brianna? Yeah, the least common factor is always going to be 1 of any 2 numbers, because 1 is a factor of all numbers. So let's look at another one. Let's look at the greatest common factor maybe of, let me get one from the book so it's kind of a good one. How about, well, the book says 15 and 100. 15 and 100. So on your paper, I very much right now want to see you write down the factors of 15. Factors of 15, Lainey Kabarik, are?
1 and 15, 3 and 5.
And then factors of 100 would be, Brooklyn?
1,
100. 2 and 50. 4 and what else? What other factors does 100 have? 4 times what? How many quarters are there in the down there? And 5 times what again? What would be their common factors? Well, again, they both have 1. It looks like they both have 5. What's the greatest common factor? Right here. Number 5, greatest common factor. How about another one? Let's try one more. What about 12 and 15? What is the greatest common factor of 12 and 15? What is the largest factor that they share? Elijah says
3.
3. The greatest common factor would be 3. Now, I'm sure you're asking yourself, what's the importance of this? Awkward silence. What is the importance of this? Well, last week we talked about reducing fractions if they have a common factor. Well, if you have 12/15 for your fraction and you need to reduce it, okay, you always want to reduce it by the greatest common factor if you can, if you think of it, because it's going to save you a lot of time. I want to divide both of these by 3, and my answer will be what if I reduce that fraction? 12 divided by 3 is 4. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 4/5. Just like if you see the fraction 6/12. Okay, you could divide it by 2 because 2 goes into both of those, but the problem is if you divide it by 2 and you get 3/6, it's still not reduced all the way. If you reduce this by its greatest common factor, what's the greatest common factor of 6 and 12? Greatest common factor of 6 and 12, it's not 2. 2 is a common, but it's not the greatest. Meg? 3 is not the greatest common factor of 6 and 12. Isabel?
6.
6. You always want to try to reduce by the greatest common factor. In this case, it's 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1. 12 divided by 6 is 2. So it's always the greatest common factor that you want to try